I'm Claire Whitman, 35 years old, and as I stood in that law office, my mother's voice cut through the room like ice. You're not part of this family anymore. My cheeks burned. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and for a moment, I believed her. The way my father looked past me, the way my sister smirked without lifting her eyes from her phone, they made it easy to feel invisible. I turned toward the door, ready to walk out like I had so many times before. But then the lawyer reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope. He said my name, just my name, and the whole room went quiet. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been made to feel like you didn't belong in your own family. I was born and raised in Arlington, Virginia. My parents ran a private consulting firm that worked with defense contractors. Long hours, long dinners, longer shadows. My older sister Grace fit their world perfectly. She was elegant, sharp-tongued, always dressed like she was walking into a photo shoot. I wasn't like her. I liked art. I liked quiet. I liked knowing how people felt more than how they looked. From a young age, I could tell I was the odd one. Not because anyone said it outright, but because of what they didn't say. My drawings weren't displayed on the fridge. My volunteer work wasn't mentioned at dinner. When I got a scholarship to a public university, instead of going to the same Ivy as my father, it was called a phase. My grandfather, Walter Whitman, was the only one who never treated me like a footnote. He had this old porch swing out back where we'd sit on Sunday afternoons drinking ginger ale and talking about nothing in particular. He'd always say, "Kindness isn't weakness, Claire. It's memory." He taught me how to plant tomatoes, how to change a tire, how to see people, not their resumes. When I took a job at a nonprofit helping domestic abuse survivors rebuild their lives, he was the one who showed up at our first fundraiser with a $5,000 check and a tin of homemade cookies. But the rest of my family, they treated it like I had joined a cult. My mother told friends I was still figuring things out. Grace called me a martyr. And my father, he stopped looking me in the eye after I turned down a job at his firm, said I was wasting my education. After a while, the invitations stopped coming. First to cocktail hours, then holidays. One year I got a text that Christmas dinner had been downsized, just immediate family. Another year I wasn't even told it was happening. At some point I stopped checking my phone for updates. I focused on work, on the women we served, on my dog Honey, and the little apartment I made my own. I told myself I didn't need them, that I'd built something better. Then my grandfather passed, and no one told me. I didn't get a call. I didn't get a message. I found out because a donor from the shelter clipped his obituary and left it on my desk. They buried him without me. 3 weeks later, I got an email. Formal, no greeting, just a time, a date, and a location for the will reading. It was signed by his lawyer, Benjamin Langford. I almost deleted it. I thought maybe it was a mistake, but I remembered Grandpa had always said that if anything happened, Langford would know what to do. So I went. Not because I wanted anything, not because I had hope. I just needed to know if the man who called me his compass had remembered me in the end. What I walked into wasn't grief. It was theater. My parents were already seated, my father in his pressed navy suit, my mother in pearls like always. Grace was there too, tapping away on her phone, wearing a white dress like it was her own wedding. The moment I walked in, all three of them stopped talking. My mother narrowed her eyes. My sister didn't even look up. And then she said it like it was a line she'd been waiting years to deliver. "You're not part of this family anymore." I didn't answer right away. I just took a seat at the end of the table. The lawyer looked at me and nodded, calm as ever. Then he reached into his case and pulled out the envelope. And that's when everything changed. The envelope was thick, sealed in red wax, and the lawyer held it like it weighed more than just paper. His fingers brushed the edge as he placed it on the polished table, and I could feel every eye turn toward it, then toward me. My father shifted in his chair with a sigh that felt more like a warning. My mother's lips curled into a tight practice smile, the kind she used at charity events when someone spilled wine on the carpet. Grace crossed one leg over the other and leaned back like she already knew how this would go. "Before we begin," Mr. Langford said, his voice steady, "your grandfather asked me to share a brief statement." My mother's smile didn't falter, but her knuckles whitened on the armrest. Grace finally looked up from her phone. "Oh, for heaven's sake," my mother said lightly, waving one hand. "Let's just get this over with." The room settled into an uneasy quiet, like we were all waiting for a train that might not stop. Mr. Langford unfolded a piece of paper, his eyes scanning it before he began to read. His voice was calm, precise, without drama, but each word landed like it had been measured. My grandfather hadn't left a generic farewell. He'd written it himself, and every sentence was deliberate. He named me as the sole beneficiary. Just like that. No build-up, no apologies, no explanations. My name, and no one else's. The air shifted. You could hear it. Not the rustle of fabric or the tick of a watch, something quieter than that. Like the silence right before glass shatters. My father blinked twice like he wasn't sure he'd heard right. Grace froze mid-scroll, her thumb hovering in the air. My mother leaned forward, then stopped herself like her body didn't know what to do. "This is absurd," she said finally, her voice louder than it needed to be. "Walter would never do that. Not after everything Claire's put us through." Mr. Langford didn't respond. He simply opened his briefcase and pulled out a second folder, this one thinner marked with a small label. He slid it across the table without a word. "This," he said, "is a certified medical evaluation from St. Augustine Medical Center, conducted and signed by Dr. Miriam Tate 2 months before Mr. Whitman's death." He opened the folder. The report confirms Mr. Whitman was of sound mind and capable of making legal decisions. He was fully aware of the contents of his will. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. Her eyes darted to my father. He looked down, jaw clenched. Grace let out a soft laugh, more of a scoff. "Well, I guess you got your little victory, Claire." I didn't answer. I just sat there, hands folded in my lap, trying to keep my breathing even. It wasn't joy. It wasn't revenge. It was something quieter, something I didn't have a name for yet. Then Mr. Langford pulled out a black flash drive. "There's one more thing," he said. "Your grandfather recorded a message." My mother's expression finally cracked. She went pale. My father's shoulders stiffened. Grace muttered, "Oh, God," under her breath. Mr. Langford inserted the drive into a small laptop and turned the screen toward us. He didn't ask for permission. He just clicked play. And there he was, my grandfather, sitting in his old armchair by the sunroom window, wearing his favorite cardigan, the one with the hole in the elbow. His glasses were crooked, and his hands rested quietly in his lap. But his voice, it was strong, unshaken. "If you're watching this," he began, "then I'm gone. I won't pretend we were a perfect family. We weren't." He paused. His eyes were calm, steady, like he was talking to us across the table. "I've seen how this family treats the truth," he continued. "You hide behind good manners and polished reputations. You pretend things are fine as long as no one says otherwise." The room was silent. "To my son Robert," he said, and I watched my father tense. "You made a name for yourself in real estate. But not by building, by manipulating. You sold homes to people you knew couldn't afford them. You promised stability and delivered debt. I have the records. I spoke to the families." He leaned forward slightly, voice colder now. "They trusted you. You took advantage of them." My father didn't move. To my granddaughter Grace, Grandpa said, "You've turned charity into a brand. Use my name to open doors I never gave you keys to. I trusted you with a shared account to help with my bills, nothing more. Instead, you used it to fly to Miami and sponsor events with fashion bloggers. Grace made a noise like she was about to interrupt, but nothing came out. "And to you, Evelyn," he said next. "My mother," his voice softening just slightly. "You raised this family like it was a business. Appearance was always more important than truth. You taught Claire that kindness was weakness. You tried to erase her." He looked into the camera. And then he said my name. "Claire," he said, and something in his voice shifted. "You never asked me for a thing. You came by to check on me. You brought soup when I had the flu. You remembered how your grandmother folded napkins, and you did it just the same." He paused again. "You stood alone more times than I can count. I should have said this when I had the chance. I was proud of you. I always was." My throat tightened. "I'm leaving everything to you," he said. "Not because you begged for it, not because you fought for it, but because you didn't." He leaned back in his chair. "To the rest of you," he said plainly, "you will receive nothing." Then he added, "But if you try to fight this, a file with name statements and recordings will be released to the public." The screen went black. No music, no fade out. Just the quiet hum of the laptop fan and the sound of someone, maybe Grace, exhaling sharply. Mr. Langford closed the file, then looked around the room. "That concludes the statement." No one moved. No one spoke. Then he picked up the envelope with the red seal and began reading the will. The tone was clinical now, legal, formal, but the content felt anything but. "To my son Robert, I leave a framed photograph of the first home he sold before the lies started. To my daughter-in-law Evelyn, I leave my wife's etiquette book with the chapter on humility marked. To my granddaughter Grace, I leave a file of every receipt she charged to my account. May it remind her that grace is not something you can buy." Then he paused. "And to Claire Whitman," he said, lifting a separate sheet of paper, "I leave everything else." My mother stood abruptly. "This is outrageous," she snapped. "He was manipulated. This isn't over." Mr. Langford nodded once. "You're welcome to contest the will, but if you do, the files Mr. Whitman referenced will be distributed to the relevant parties." She sat back down, and just like that, the room was quiet again. But this time, it wasn't a silence meant to punish. It was a silence no one knew how to fill. The air in the room hadn't moved since the screen went black. Even after Mr. Langford finished reading the will, no one stood up. No one left. It was like we were all waiting for someone to say something that could make sense of what had just happened. I sat quietly at the end of the table, my hands resting on the edge, my eyes fixed on the wax seal Mr. Langford had broken just moments before. I wasn't thinking about the money or the properties or the life insurance. I was thinking about the porch swing, about the tin of oatmeal cookies my grandfather brought me every year on my birthday, about the last time we played cards in his sunroom, and he said, "You know, Claire, it takes more strength to stay soft in this world than it does to harden." Across from me, Grace stared down at the table, her arms crossed tight against her chest. My mother's hands hadn't moved from the edge of her seat since she sat back down. My father didn't look at anyone. He just kept his eyes forward like he could disappear if he stared hard enough. It should have felt like a victory, but it didn't. Not in that moment. It felt like something else, something heavier. Mr. Langford gathered the documents into a neat pile, sliding the folder back into his briefcase without a word. The zipper moved slowly, intentional, final. Still no one said a thing. My mother finally broke the silence. "We should have known he'd pull something like this," she said, more to the room than to anyone in particular. "He always had a soft spot for strays." She didn't look at me when she said it. She didn't have to. My father exhaled, sharp and short. "This isn't over." Mr. Langford raised an eyebrow but didn't respond. Then Grace leaned forward. Her voice was low, almost too casual. "Did you know before today?" she asked. I met her eyes. "No." She nodded slowly, like she didn't quite believe me. I stood up. The room seemed smaller somehow, like it had folded in on itself. I didn't say goodbye. I just walked out past the glass-walled reception area, past the marble-tiled foyer, and out into the late afternoon sun. My car was parked half a block down. I unlocked the door and sat inside with the engine off, letting the warmth settle over me. My phone buzzed twice, then fell silent. I didn't look. That night I didn't sleep much. I kept turning over everything I'd heard, everything I hadn't. I tried to picture my grandfather sitting alone in that chair recording his final words. What it must have taken to say those things out loud, not because he didn't care, but because he finally did. In the morning, I checked my email. 2 messages from Mr. Langford, one with an attached file confirming the deed transfer for the house on Willow Hill, the other with account summaries and a list of contacts for the estate transition. I scrolled through the documents without really absorbing them. It didn't feel real yet. Later that week, I drove out to the house. It had been years since I'd been there. The gravel driveway crunched under the tires just the same. The front steps still leaned slightly to the left. The roses along the side fence had overgrown, curling over the edge like they'd been waiting for someone to come tend to them. I unlocked the door with the key Mr. Langford sent overnight by courier. The hinges creaked the way they always did. Inside, nothing had changed. The entryway still smelled faintly of tobacco and cedar. The framed photograph of my grandparents on their wedding day hung in the same place above the small antique table with the wobbly leg. I walked through the living room, ran my hand along the back of the couch where we used to sit and watch baseball. In the kitchen, the chipped ceramic cookie jar still sat beside the stove, filled with nothing but a roll of masking tape and a few buttons. I made tea the way he liked it, just 1 sugar, no lemon, and took it out to the porch. I sat on the swing looking out over the yard. The hydrangeas were fading out of season, but the mint he planted last year had spread. The wind moved through the trees, rustling softly like a sound from some other time. In the stillness, I thought about all the birthdays I spent alone, the holidays I stopped attending, the phone calls I stopped returning, and I thought about how no one had reached out since the will reading. No messages, no apology, not even a question. The silence that used to sting didn't anymore. It felt different now, like something returned to its rightful place. By the end of the week, I'd started a checklist for what the house needed. The roof needed patching. The upstairs bathroom needed new tile. The basement had a leak near the back corner. I called a contractor recommended by one of the women at the shelter. She'd done drywall and paintwork for years before she left her husband and started over with her 2 kids. I hired her on the spot. The next day I called the shelter again, asked if anyone else was looking for short-term housing while waiting for placement. By the end of the month, I had 4 women living in the guest rooms. We took turns cooking dinner. We painted the porch railing. One of them started a small vegetable garden in the back using seeds she'd carried through 3 states. None of it was flashy. None of it was fast. But it was real. And in the quiet moments in the evening light coming through the windows and the sound of laughter drifting from the kitchen, I felt something settle in me that had been out of place for a very long time. Still, I knew it wasn't over. Not really. Because even as I rebuilt something better, I could feel the weight of what still lingered. And I knew they'd come back. Not with apologies, not with regret, but with plans. 2 weeks passed before I saw the first sign. I'd just come in from the garden dirt, under my nails' knees, sore from crouching by the rosemary bed. There was a manila envelope sitting neatly on the porch swing, no postage, no return address. My name was written across the front in a tidy, unfamiliar hand. I looked down the driveway. No car, no footprints in the gravel. Inside was a printed document, neatly formatted, from a legal firm I didn't recognize. It wasn't a threat, not in words. Just a request to clarify a few provisions of my grandfather's will. A polite inquiry, a foot in the door. I folded the paper in half and placed it back in the envelope. Then I walked it straight to the fireplace and burned it. That same evening, my phone rang. The number was blocked. I let it go to voicemail. The next day, the same number called again, and then again a few hours later. By the end of the week, I had 5 missed calls, 2 voicemails, and 1 text from an unknown number that read, "Claire, let's talk." It doesn't have to be like this. It didn't say who it was. It didn't have to. I sat on the back steps that night just past sundown. The crickets were loud and the porch light hummed faintly overhead. I could hear the women inside laughing in the kitchen, arguing gently about which spice was missing from the stew. I thought about the long silence that used to come after family holidays, about how no one checked in, how birthdays came and went without even a card. Now they were calling. Now they wanted to talk. The next morning I opened my grandfather's study for the first time. The room smelled like old books and cedar oil. The shelves were still lined with the titles he loved: history, gardening, crossword puzzle anthologies. His desk was neatly organized. On the far corner sat a small wooden box. No lock, just a hinged lid. Inside was a stack of letters tied with green twine, receipts, notes, a photograph of a couple I didn't recognize, and a folder with my name written in his handwriting. There was no letter inside, just a copy of the final will, a handwritten list of charities he'd supported over the years, and 1 sheet of yellow paper. At the top it read, "In case they try to come back." He'd listed steps, names, instructions for the lawyer. I sat down slowly, reading through each line, not with shock, not with fear, just understanding. I wasn't surprised they'd started reaching out. I was surprised it had taken them this long. 3 days later, Grace showed up at the house. I heard the tires before I saw the car, some glossy black SUV, the kind she always used to lease on company accounts. She parked crooked in the gravel and stepped out wearing sunglasses and heels. It was barely 8 in the morning. I met her at the porch steps. "Claire," she said, as if we'd seen each other last week. "You look settled." She had a white envelope in her hand. "I just want to talk," she said. I didn't answer. She looked past me toward the front door. "Can we sit down?" "No." She shifted her weight 1 heel, sinking into the dirt. "This doesn't have to be a fight," she said. "We're sisters." I looked at her. Her face was calm, like she believed the word sister still carried weight. She held out the envelope. "You should read this. It's from Dad. He's willing to come to the table." I didn't take it. She waited a few seconds, then laid it on the railing. "You'll do what you want," she said. Before she turned to leave, she added, "You can't live here forever like this. Sooner or later you'll need people." I watched her walk back to the car. Her door slammed a little too hard. I didn't pick up the envelope until that evening. I didn't open it. I just placed it next to the ashes of the other one. The next day, the phone calls stopped. But I knew this wasn't over. The silence wasn't peace. It was preparation. And something in me shifted. Not just because I was angry, but because I understood what this was now. This wasn't about inheritance. It never had been. It was about control. And for the first time, I had more of it than they did. After Grace's visit, I knew I had to stop waiting for their apologies, their calls, their peace. I needed to take the first step, but on my own terms. I wasn't looking for a fight. I wasn't seeking revenge. I just wanted honesty, accountability, something real. I called Mr. Langford the next morning and asked him to schedule a meeting with my father, mother, and Grace. He agreed, but warned me it wouldn't be easy. The room we met in was smaller than the lawyer's office, an old conference room in a downtown building with cracked leather chairs and a slow ceiling fan. The kind of place where business and family collide, but neither quite wins. They arrived separately. My mother was the first poised and composed, but with a tension I'd never seen before. My father looked tired, older than I remembered. Grace had swapped her heels for flats, but kept the same guarded expression. When I entered, their eyes flicked over me quickly, weighing me up. I started with what mattered most. "You all know why we're here," I said. "This isn't about money. It's about what Grandpa left behind, the truth, the legacy, the chance to make things right." My father scoffed. "Claire, you're making this personal. You're twisting everything." "No," I replied. "I'm asking you to look at what's real. The Mendozas, the families you hurt Dad. You owe them more than words." He clenched his fists, but didn't speak. My mother crossed her arms. "I don't know what you want from me." I looked at her directly. "You'll volunteer at the shelter I work with. No cameras, no press, just 3 months helping women rebuild. It's time to see the world outside this house." Grace's eyes narrowed. "And me? You'll call every brand you used Grandpa's name with. You'll admit the truth. You'll step down from your partnerships. You owe that to the people you misled." She shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. "I'm not here to punish," I said softly. "I'm here to offer a chance, one last chance, to be part of something honest." The room stayed silent. My mother's face flickered between disbelief and frustration. My father's jaw tightened, but his eyes didn't waver. Grace looked away, biting her lip. For the first time in years, I felt a strange calm. I wasn't begging for acceptance. I wasn't asking for love. I was setting terms, boundaries I hoped they'd respect. But as I finished, I could see it in their eyes. This wasn't what they wanted. It wasn't the plan. When the meeting ended, I left without another word. Days turned into weeks. There were no calls, no messages, no emails, nothing. But I wasn't waiting anymore. I threw myself into restoring the house. I worked alongside the women from the shelter, painting walls, planting herbs, repairing creaky stairs. We turned empty rooms into spaces filled with hope, a guest wing, a workshop area, a small library. Sometimes I caught a glimpse of what my grandfather had seen in me, a quiet strength, a refusal to break under pressure. One evening as the sun dipped behind the trees, Mr. Langford stopped by with a small package, a photo taped to a note. It was the two of us on the back steps, laughing without care. The note said, Grandpa had carried it in his wallet every day. I held it close and felt something settle inside me, a peace I hadn't known in years. I hadn't won by breaking them. I had won by refusing to become them. It was late afternoon when Mr. Langford called me again. I recognized the cautious tone in his voice immediately. He asked if I was free to meet at his office, something urgent that couldn't wait. I told him yes, hung up gently, and drove into town, arriving just as the sun began to dip behind the courthouse clock. Inside the office felt quieter than before. Mr. Langford offered me a seat and closed the door softly behind us. On his desk was a folder, simple, plain, the kind you'd hardly notice if you weren't already looking. "Claire," he started slowly, "I received a notice this morning. Your family has filed a formal challenge to your grandfather's will." I sat very still. He watched me carefully, his eyes calm but tired. "They're alleging coercion," he continued, "claiming undue influence, mental incompetence, everything we knew they might." I let the words settle. None of it surprised me, but the weight of it still pressed against my chest. "Did they know the conditions Grandpa laid out?" I asked quietly. He nodded. "Yes, they knew, but it seems they believe those files he left behind won't surface or that we're bluffing." Mr. Langford opened the folder, sliding it gently across his desk. Inside were photocopies, neatly organized emails, bank statements, signatures, and a handwritten list of names and dates. "This is what your grandfather entrusted to me," he said quietly. These are the documents he spoke of in his video. I took the folder and flipped through the papers slowly. The evidence was clear, precise, unavoidable. Every accusation Grandpa had made, every secret deal and dishonest transaction was laid out calmly without exaggeration. "You'll have to decide how you want to proceed," Mr. Langford said. "Your grandfather was clear if they challenged the will, these documents should go public." I looked at the evidence again. My father's signatures next to deals he had denied. Grace's account transfers for luxury vacations billed under Grandpa's name. Even my mother's quiet influence manipulating social circles and charity boards laid bare in print. It was quiet for a moment. I could hear the faint ticking of the antique clock on his shelf. "They believe they can outlast you," he said gently. "They're counting on your kindness." When I left his office, the streetlights had flickered on. It was cooler now, the air crisp as I drove slowly home. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was glowing softly lit from within. Through the front window, I saw two of the women from the shelter talking over cups of tea. Another was reading in the corner. I watched quietly for a minute before heading inside. They greeted me warmly, and for a while I sat among them listening to their conversation. Small things, the day's chores, their plans for tomorrow, a new recipe someone had found. It felt warm and good, but I couldn't quite let go of the folder, still resting on the passenger seat of my car. Later alone on the porch, I held Grandpa's photo again. His smile steady, his arm around me carefree and open. I imagined what he'd say if he were here now. Would he tell me to fight back? Would he tell me to let it go? The night air grew cooler, and as I stood, I realized something had shifted inside me. It wasn't anger or sadness. It was clarity. My family had counted on my silence, relied on my reluctance to speak uncomfortable truths. But maybe it was time to let the truth speak for itself. I called Mr. Langford the next morning and told him to prepare the documents for release, not out of revenge, not even out of hurt, but because I realized finally that kindness wasn't about silence. It was about honesty, even when it cost something. 2 days later, my phone rang again. It was Grace. Her voice sounded different now, less guarded, more desperate. "Claire, please," she began, her tone uneven, strained. "We didn't think you'd really do this. Dad's reputation, Mom's standing in the community. You're destroying everything." I listened calmly, waited for her to finish. "Grace," I said quietly, "I didn't do this, you did. Grandpa gave each of you a choice. You made yours." She was silent a moment, then hung up. Outside, the wind picked up rustling the leaves in the garden. The afternoon sunlight moved slowly across the floorboards, warm and golden. I knew things wouldn't be easy now. My family would push back harder than before, but I wasn't afraid. Because for the first time I understood exactly what my grandfather had tried to show me, that honesty was stronger than any secret, more powerful than silence, no matter how long it had been buried. It didn't take long before the news spread through town. It moved quietly at first, in whispers at the grocery store and the murmurs behind the coffee counter. Then it grew louder, sharper, into headlines, printed clearly in bold letters that were impossible to ignore. My father's face was on the front page, his name spelled out alongside words like fraud and deception. Grace's partnerships dissolved quickly, one after another, quietly announced in carefully worded press statements. And my mother, once the center of every social circle, stopped appearing at her usual luncheons and charity events. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel relieved. I watched it unfold from the quiet of the house, spending days tending to the women who lived here, planting new herbs, mending old furniture. I felt strangely separate from it, as if I were observing the unraveling of a story from a safe distance. Then one morning my father's car appeared at the end of the driveway. He parked carefully and stepped out slowly. He looked smaller somehow without his suit jacket, his hair more gray than I'd remembered. He approached the porch cautiously, pausing before he spoke. "Claire," he said gently, "can we talk?" I nodded toward the chairs on the porch. He hesitated, then sat down across from me. For a long minute, neither of us said a word. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I didn't come here to make excuses," he began slowly. "There's no point in that now. But I wanted to say that you were right. I was wrong." His voice was steady but quiet. "Your grandfather tried to warn me. So did you. I didn't listen because I thought I knew better. I waited, letting the silence settle between us." He exhaled softly. "I'm paying the money back. Every penny. The families will be compensated directly." He looked away, staring at the flowers near the railing. "It won't fix things, but it's a start." I watched him carefully. "And Mom..." He paused again, shaking his head gently. "She's angry. Embarrassed, I think. She doesn't understand yet. But she will. And Grace..." His expression softened. "She's learning, more quickly than we did." I leaned back in the chair, the old wood creaking beneath me. "What do you want from me, Dad?" He took a deep breath. "Forgiveness," he said quietly, "or a chance to earn it." We sat together for a while longer without speaking, watching the trees shift gently in the breeze. Eventually, he stood up, brushed off his pants, and looked at me carefully. "Thank you for hearing me out," he said softly. "I know you didn't have to." He walked slowly to his car, climbed in, and drove away. I stayed on the porch for a long time after he was gone, feeling the sun move slowly across my hands. A few days later, my mother arrived at the shelter. She stood hesitantly at the entrance, dressed simply, for once her eyes unsure. She approached me with cautious steps, pausing as if waiting for me to turn her away. "I'm here to help," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me what you need me to do." I handed her an apron, walked her into the kitchen, and introduced her to the women working quietly at the stove. She listened closely, nodded gently, and began washing vegetables at the sink. I didn't hover, I didn't watch. But I noticed as the days passed how she slowly became part of the quiet rhythm of our routine. She didn't speak much, didn't offer explanations, but her hands became familiar with the tasks, and her presence gradually softened. Grace called again this time, in a voice that wasn't defensive or sharp. She spoke simply, calmly. I've stepped down from everything she said quietly, publicly, completely. She paused for a long moment. I think Grandpa would have wanted that. When I hung up the phone, I felt something gentle shift inside me. Not triumph, not victory, just a sense of relief that felt like coming up for air after a long time underwater. That evening, as I moved through the house, turning off lights, checking doors, I saw Grandpa's photograph again sitting quietly on the mantel. His eyes held mine for a moment, steady knowing. I realized then that justice hadn't come through anger or confrontation or revenge. It had come quietly through honesty, patience, and a willingness to let go of expectations I'd held on to for years. I touched the frame gently, feeling the cool glass beneath my fingertips, and let myself breathe deeply. I knew things weren't perfect yet, that the hardest conversations might still be ahead, but for now, for tonight, this felt like enough. I climbed the stairs slowly, feeling the quiet of the house around me, knowing the path ahead would take courage and time. And I was finally ready to face whatever came next. In the months that followed, life settled into a gentle rhythm. My father visited again, bringing boxes of paperwork, quiet evidence of his efforts to make things right. My mother continued volunteering less cautiously each week, learning to let go of her guarded elegance and replace it with genuine warmth. Grace began coming by on Sundays, and though we spoke carefully, the sharp edges between us had softened. I didn't know exactly where our relationships would land, but it felt peaceful not to rush. The house thrived, too. Women came and went, some stayed for weeks, others for months, each leaving something meaningful behind: a painted chair, a garden bed, a handwritten recipe on the kitchen board. We built something sturdy, something real out of pieces once thought broken. One afternoon, Mr. Langford visited again. He brought a small envelope and handed it to me with a quiet nod. Inside was a simple letter from Grandpa, dated just before he passed, written in careful script, strong despite his age. "Claire," it began, "if you're reading this, then you know how proud I am of who you've become. Remember always, justice isn't about victory. It's about dignity, about kindness holding firm even when tested. Stay gentle, my dear granddaughter. The world needs hearts like yours." I folded the letter softly, placing it carefully in my pocket. Later that evening, sitting on the porch swing with a mug of tea, I let the quiet wash over me. Grandpa was right. Justice hadn't been about winning. It was about staying true to who I was, even when the world pushed me toward bitterness. The sun dipped low, spreading gentle gold across the garden. The rosemary we'd planted months ago filled the air with fragrance, and the laughter of women in the kitchen floated warmly through the open window. I leaned back, closing my eyes, feeling a sense of completion settle softly into place. Through all of this, I hadn't changed them, not really. They had changed themselves, and perhaps somewhere deep down, that's what Grandpa had truly hoped for all along. Now, friend, before I leave you, I invite you to reflect on your own journey, your own quiet victories, your moments of gentle strength. If this story spoke to you, please share it with someone you care about or leave your own thoughts below. And if you feel like joining me again sometime, know that you'll always have a seat right here on this porch beside me.